They called it a visionary pivot, but what it was exile. Over bourbon ribs at Branson's Chop House, the CFO leaned in, smiled too widely, and told me I'd be stepping down replaced by the founder's godson, fresh off a Stanford internship. After 9 years of rebuilding this tech fortress from scratch, I, Marlon, 44, was being erased. I didn't argue. I just nodded, sipped my iced tea, and thought, they think I didn't see this coming. They're wrong. I was the silent architect behind Redwood Freight's entire digital backbone for nearly a decade. You wouldn't know it from the corporate press kits or investor decks. No headlines, no plaques. But every shipment that moved, every warehouse that stayed humming through snowstorms and blackouts ran on code I wrote. I took a single, failing IT desk in Tulsa and turned it into a 24-hour operations command center that spans 6 states. When I joined, their servers were duct-taped Linux boxes running out of a broom closet. Within 3 years, I had built a layered infrastructure with live redundancy, AI-driven logistics, and remote repair protocols. It wasn't supposed to be permanent. I took the role after my mother passed away, something to focus on, just for a while, but I saw possibility in their chaos, and I made it mine. Not on paper, not legally. But in sweat, sleep I didn't get, and problems I solved when no one else could. I wasn't just part of Redwood's system, I was the system, and they knew it, or at least, they used to. They chose Hunter and Rye for the meeting dim lighting, $90 steaks, and servers in suits, a place where CEOs broker acquisitions, not bury careers. Across the polished table sat Reagan Bell, our polished CFO. Slicing into C-base like this was routine. We're refreshing leadership, she said, tone smooth as her wine. Fresh blood, sharper vision. Translation? I was out, and her godson, Theo, barely 26, with a blockchain certificate and a TikTok following, was in. I didn't flinch. I asked who'd be handling the transition. She glanced at her phone and said, "You've got 8 weeks. Let's keep it graceful." I nodded, signed the NDA. She slid across the table and walked out into the rainy Austin afternoon. Back at HQ, my access had already been throttled. My name was erased from the department roster. The decision wasn't made that day. It had been carved into stone long before the appetizer arrived. I didn't know it yet. The night after that lunch, I couldn't sleep. It wasn't anger. Not yet. It was the itch that comes when your instincts whisper louder than logic. 2 weeks before that meal, I'd noticed strange pings in our server logs, subtle attempts to access off-network documentation, and failed logins from an IP tied to the executive floor. Someone had been snooping where they didn't belong. At first, I thought it was just clumsy vendor oversight, but then my credentials were downgraded without warning. Access was denied to the private dev servers I built myself. Project folders were wiped from my local drives. The coup wasn't just in motion, it was already nearly complete. They weren't just replacing me. They were studying me, mining me, copying blueprints I never published, protocols only I knew how to maintain. I'd built this system like an Artisano user manual, no plug and play. But they thought they could reverse engineer me. That's when the anger finally set in. Quiet, controlled, focused, the kind that doesn't burn it, freezes. 16 years ago, I left Sacramento and followed Serena to Dallas. She'd gotten into a dual degree program in law and urban planning, and I didn't have a plan. I figured I'd land something. I always did. But when she left a note on the counter one Tuesday, "We want different futures," it felt like the bottom dropped out of mine. No fight, no affair, just a cold, clean departure. I ended up crashing on my cousin Rico's futon for 6 months, juggling gig work and grief. That's when Redwood Freight came calling. Their main warehouse had just suffered a catastrophic system breach. Ransomware had frozen every terminal. Trucks were stalled, millions in delays. They needed someone who could patch the bleeding fast. I stepped in, freelance at first, with no benefits, contract to contract. But I saw a logistics empire run on expired software, vulnerable routers, and hope. So, I pitched a rebuild. A 5-year, end-to-end digital transformation plan. Somehow, they said yes. From that moment, I became a ghost in the building, always there, rarely seen. I built layered redundancy networks, trained supervisors who still thought RAM was a flavor of soup, and programmed a robust predictive maintenance algorithm that even winter blackouts couldn't stall our cold chain delivery. When Hurricane Mabel hit in 2017 and took down half the grid, we were the only regional carrier still online. That's when the board took notice. Suddenly, I was being invited to quarterly planning sessions. My budget tripled. I hired a team, Kendra from Chicago, with a brain like a circuit board, and Elias, who could automate anything short of breathing. Together, we weren't just IT support, we were the company's pulse. But I never asked for praise. I wasn't in this for titles. Redwood was never my dream job. But somewhere along the way, I'd poured so much of myself into it that the lines between mine and theirs blurred. I didn't just fix their systems. I became one of them. The first tremor hit last October. Clive from a third-party digital resilience firm was unannounced at HQ. Clipboard in hand, crisp polo shirt, all smiles. He asked surface-level questions about systems I had personally architected line by line. I humored him at first. Then I asked who brought him in. He said, "The strategy group," and changed the subject. 2 days later, my access to board review materials disappeared from our shared cloud without explanation. The placeholder message? Storage audit in progress. Right. By December, Reagan began canceling our regular Thursday syncs. At first, it was off-site meetings or last-minute reviews, but the pattern stuck. At the annual leadership summit in Palm Springs, I overheard her talking to someone from operations about Theo's graduation. "He's a unicorn," she gushed. Cybersecurity, cloud migration, predictive analytics all rolled into one. Even got courted by SpaceX. I should have seen it. Maybe I did. But I didn't want to believe I was being phased out by a resume on paper. Then came the slip I couldn't ignore. Kendra, longest-standing engineer, told me she'd been invited to a high-level planning session I typically led. When she brought up my name, the room went silent. Reagan shifted topics instantly. "It felt wrong," Kendra said, "like they were building something around your absence." That's when the fog lifted. It wasn't just corporate drift. It was orchestration. A slow, surgical remove-alone calendar update at a time. 2 days after Kendra's warning, I was alone in the West Wing server vault. At 8:17 p.m., the one place in the entire company that still felt like mine. The air was dry and humming. I'd built every rack in this room, handpicked each component, and optimized every cooling node. It was the closest thing I had to a legacy. I was running a routine diagnostic when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned and saw him, Theo Langston. Polished haircut, designer boots, and the kind of charisma that seemed manufactured in a Silicon Valley lab. "Just getting a feel for the setup," he said casually, stepping in like he already owned it. "Did Reagan ask you to tour this wing? She mentioned you'd be showing me around soon." I nodded once. He moved toward the central panel. "Impressive work," he said, scanning the config screens. "It's got a little bit of an old-school feel, but solid fundamentals." Old school? I'd upgraded that entire system last quarter using an edge-based container model he probably hadn't even read about yet. "And the documentation," he added, tapping through the internal wiki. "Very detailed. I've already pulled a few ideas. Looking forward to modernizing some of this." The words hit like a smirk. I didn't flinch, but inside, something clicked. He wasn't exploring, he was assessing, auditing. Judging by the log files I reviewed after he left, his admin credentials had been created 3 weeks before that lunch at Hunter and Rye. He'd already accessed my system architecture, deployment logs, and even the restricted sandbox folders that only top-level staff were supposed to see. I texted Elias that night. "Coffee? 6:30. Tomorrow. Joe's a blank." When I pulled up at dawn, he was already there, staring into his mug as if it owed him answers. "They're phasing me out," I said flatly. He didn't ask for details. "Yeah," he muttered. "I figured. They've been asking me weird questions about your code and infrastructure." "How long?" "A couple of weeks." I nodded. The storm had been building. Now I could see its shape. "They think everything's in the documentation," I whispered. "But we both know it's not." Elias leaned in. "You mean the overlays, the patches?" "And the pulse. Tracking diagnostics," I added. "The adaptive override triggers. None of that's written down. They don't even know what makes this system work." I paused. "I'm not burning the place down, but I'm not giving them everything either." That was the moment, the quiet shift. The plan had begun. By the time I left Joe's cafe that morning, the plan had started to crystallize, not all at once, not as some cinematic vengeance monologue, just as a quiet, logical unfolding. Step 1, clarity. Step 2, leverage. I drove out to Lake Trinity that night, parked in the same overlook lot where Serena and I used to watch thunderstorms in the early days back, when the world still felt linear. The lake was glassy and windless. In that stillness, something settled inside me. I didn't feel rage anymore, just resolve. That old version of me was gone. the one who gave everything to a company without asking for credit. I wasn't going to sabotage anything. That was petty, small, but I would protect what was mine. The next morning, I dug through my attic and found an old terabyte drive I hadn't touched in years. And there it was. The original framework for what would eventually become Redwood's core infrastructure, the pulse monitoring logic, the fault recovery architecture, even the prototype of the dynamic sync engine I'd later refine into what everyone called Command Link. I had built that interface long before I ever signed their offer letter. And better yet, I had email threads from back then. One of them was with Reagan herself, responding to my pitch to adapt Command Link for Redwood's freight systems. Her exact words: "Let's move forward with integrating your tool. We'll formalize licensing once the rollout is stable." Formalize. Except they never did. Later that day, I requested a meeting with Reagan and HR Just, the three of us. I sat down, calm as a priest, and laid it all out. The development timeline, the original interface files, and the pre-employment license agreement buried in onboarding paperwork. Reagan barely blinked. HR's legal rep, Margot, said, "Anything developed under Redwood's contract falls under company IP." I nodded once, then slid forward the old printout my signature, her signature, and the checkbox labeled, "Developer retains intellectual rights to third-party frameworks unless otherwise renegotiated." They didn't respond. By the following morning, my access to the dev servers had been suspended. Standard security protocol during role transition, the auto-reply read. A few hours later, Theo held a team meeting. Everyone was invited except me. I showed up anyway, leaned against the door, and watched him try to whiteboard through a new network architecture. "We'll simplify operations," he said confidently. "No need for Marlin's workaround, heavy framework." I let that sit, then spoke evenly. "Those aren't workarounds. They're active contingencies built for our aging delivery hardware. During last year's sensor recall, that framework prevented $2.2 million in downtime. Remember that?" Theo stiffened, smiled tightly, and moved on, but I saw it the crack. Then came the real insult. I received an email from Redwood's legal division. They asserted full ownership over Command Link, citing a clause about integrated technologies becoming permanent corporate assets. They offered a $7.500 buyout as a good faith tech transfer bonus. I almost laughed. That same night, I found an email forwarded to my inbox from a supplier I'd worked with for years. They were confused by a new middleware contract Redwood had signed on their behalf, authorizing a third-party analytics platform to replace our custom integration. That platform? Theo's former Stanford roommate ran it. It wasn't just a leadership change. They were gutting my architecture, piece by piece, and handing it off to buddies like clearance furniture. When I tried to log in to retrieve my early commits, my credentials had been revoked entirely. That was the line. I texted Kendra to pull the silent backup and encryption keys. Encrypt everything. "Meet me outside the south parking lot at 8 p.m. She showed up early. I didn't say much. They just handed me a flash drive and said, "If they're willing to erase you, they'll erase the rest of us too." I nodded. She knew what was happening. That weekend, I got to work. I documented every original function of Command Link, every failover command, every behavioral subroutine I'd designed outside work hours. I sorted it into 2 vaults, a secure local repository and a hardened cloud node off Redwood's grid. I even updated the codebase to include a signature check if any unauthorized edits were attempted. The system would flag the deviation and suspend automation. "Please do not break it, not crash anything. Just pause it pending license revalidation." I also filed for a provisional patent on the pulse routing methodology Command Link used. Not the entire system, just the part that made it adaptable to logistics hardware, the part they couldn't replace. Then I reached out to someone I hadn't spoken to in years, Daphne Cross, VP of Systems at Ardentops, one of Redwood's biggest competitors. I didn't pitch. I just said, "Let's talk." She said, "We've been watching." That Monday, Theo changed all system passwords, triggered a review of all processes. He tried to replace my architecture with his own. By Wednesday, internal automation began to fail. Thermal sensors misfired, delivery routing froze. One warehouse ran out of critical buffer time and lost an entire night of shipments. No one said my name, but I knew they were thinking about it. By Thursday night, the machine was in motion. Quiet, precise, legal. That was always the line. This wasn't revenge, it was reclamation. At 11:12 p.m., I logged into the secured node I'd built off-grid. In a clean console sat Command Link X. The standalone version is stripped of Redwood's branding, layered with every update, and reinforced with my new authentication protocols. I ran one final integrity sweep, checked the signature layers, and verified that the license expiration module was live set to trigger in 96 hours. After that, without a verified developer key, the automation core would freeze. Not break, not crash, stop, wait, like a door politely refusing to open until someone knocks properly. I drafted the legal notification clean, professional, time-stamped. Then, I saved it as a draft and encrypted it with a release timer, just in case. Redundancy is sacred when your opponents don't play fair. Friday morning, I wore my best denim jacket, returned my badge, and signed the termination paperwork without hesitation. Theo tried to play charming host, suggesting a casual send-off lunch with the team. I declined. Reagan didn't even make eye contact. She stood at the far end of the HR table, like this was a quarterly budget review. After everything, that's all I got: an envelope, a handshake, and a scripted line about valuable contributions. They couldn't even fake sincerity anymore. I spent that weekend unplugged from everything except my encrypted server. No texts, no news, just me, the lake breeze, and the rhythmic certainty of a plan locked into motion. I reviewed the contingency flow and confirmed the alert message. License expired. Please get in touch with the developer to renew access. Short, civil, unmistakable. Monday at 9:03 a.m., I got a text from Kendra. Automation glitch on Dock 3. Thermal relay failed. Sensors didn't redirect. At 9:17 a.m., the core scheduler across all warehouse hubs triggered the license handshake, and at 9:20, the first complete system halt occurred. By 10:45, every distribution facility using Command Link had frozen in place. No shipments were moving. Backup scripts failed. Theo's simplified architecture hadn't accounted for real-time reroutes under load pressure. 45 minutes later, I received a call from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. At 11:12 a.m., Reagan called me directly. "Marlon," she started, her voice tight with control. "What the hell is happening?" I answered calmly. "Looks like the license key expired. That was always the agreement. This is unacceptable. You're jeopardizing the entire logistics chain." "No," I cut in, voice measured. "I'm honoring the agreement we never formalized. Command Link remains my property. What you used was a licensed version. That license, as of today, is expired. Check the timestamps." She went silent. I continued. "I've sent a new licensing offer to your legal team. It includes a detailed renewal structure, updated terms, and an NDA. It's business, Reagan, not sabotage. Just business." She hung up. By 2 p.m., I received an email from Redwood's legal counsel. The subject line read, "Urgent Licensing Resolution Command Link." By 4:30, I had a signed agreement in hand. They accepted the new licensing terms: retroactive compensation, formal recognition of ownership, and a clause restricting any further use of my codebase beyond the current deployment scope. Their systems resumed operations at 4:52 p.m. The next morning, I received another message from Daphne Cross, VP of Systems at Ardentops. "We heard what happened," it read. "We'd like to meet," I replied within the hour. We set a meeting for Thursday. Everything felt sharper when I walked into Arden's Dallas office that week. Cleaner. There is no bureaucratic haze, just engineers and decision-makers. Daphne met me in the conference room with 2 other VPs and slid a folder across the table. "We're in the process of absorbing Redwood's freight division," she said plainly. "But more importantly, we want you to oversee the integration. As a consultant, not an employee. You pick your hours. You run the system." I flipped through the offer. Double my former salary. Full autonomy. A clause protecting all future innovations as personal intellectual property. I looked up. "And Theo?" Daphne's face didn't flinch. "He's being transitioned out. There were performance concerns." I signed that afternoon. 2 weeks later, Kendra joined my team, then Elias. Eventually, half the department came over. We weren't rebuilding Redwood. We were building something more innovative. Freer. A company that understood that the heart of a system isn't just code, it's the people who shape it. A month later, I used my first consulting payout to place a down payment on a small cabin near Lake Trinity. Wood paneling. Big windows. Quiet dock. A place with no keycards, no VPNs, no middle managers in overpriced shoes pretending to be visionaries. One night, I ran into Reagan at a downtown charity event. She looked tired. Not broken, just faded. She approached, wine glass in hand, and said, "You won." I looked at her for a long moment. "It wasn't about winning," I said. "It was about knowing what I was worth." She nodded once and walked away. And I stood there, watching the city lights flicker against the glass, thinking not about what I'd lost, but what I'd reclaimed. The Monday after I signed with Ardentop's, I woke up to the quiet hum of the lake outside my new cabin and the sound of 5 missed calls on my phone, all from numbers tied to Redwood's main line. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I already knew what was happening. At exactly 8:47 a.m., Command Link initiated its second layer verification, a silent compliance check built into the update I'd pushed weeks prior. When it failed to verify a valid license key under the new ownership terms, the system didn't crash, it paused. Not a bug, not a failure, a deliberate breath. By 9:15, 2 distribution centers were already reporting full system stalls. By 10 o'clock, every critical operation in Redwood's western corridor was offline. Dock relays, truck dispatch sequences, temperature control for perishable freight frozen mid-process. Their entire operation was suspended in a perfectly still frame of digital silence. I knew the moment Reagan would call. I even guessed the tone, half threat, half desperation. She didn't disappoint. "Marlon," she snapped, breath short. "We thought the agreement you sent was symbolic. We didn't expect you to actually—" I cut her off. "It was a formal offer. You had 10 days to respond. I extended it twice. There are contracts. And none of them override the 2011 Framework Ownership Clause. I developed Command Link independently. You integrated it under a temporary license. That license expired. You chose not to renew." Silence. "The new licensing agreement still stands." I continued. "You can sign today and resume operations immediately. Or," I paused, "you can spend 3 weeks rebuilding a system that took me 11 years to master." That landed. By 3:42 p.m., I received confirmation. The new licensing contract was signed. Full recognition of my ownership. Retroactive compensation. A clause that guaranteed no internal replication or derivative versions. Most importantly, a non-disparagement agreement binding Redwood's leadership to silence how the transition truly unfolded. But the shift didn't stop there. 3 days later, I received a formal onboarding packet from Ardentop's. Not just as a consultant, but also as Director of Infrastructure Integration. Remote first. Complete authority over team composition. And a clear mandate. Bring stability. Bring vision. Get the kind of backbone Redwood never knew how to respect. Theo quietly let go that Friday. The internal story was that he was pursuing new ventures. In truth, 3 major suppliers had pulled contracts due to automation inconsistencies traced back to his architecture, streamlining. They had no choice. Reputation is expensive to rebuild once reliability goes missing. Reagan remained CEO through the Redwood Ardent transition, but her title became largely ceremonial. No seat at engineering meetings, no decision-making clearance. It's just a polished name on a letterhead, drifting further from relevance with every passing quarter. Meanwhile, I built a new team that knew loyalty wasn't about staying quiet, but about standing up for what works. Kendra came on board within weeks. Elias soon after. We didn't rebuild Redwood. We rewrote the script. And this time, I owned every single line. The dust didn't settle, reorganized. Redwood wasn't gone, but had been gutted and repackaged, its identity diluted into Ardentop's greater machine. Meanwhile, I was finally living on my terms. That quiet cabin by Lake Trinity wasn't just a retreat, but a symbol, a place without politics, bad faith meetings, or passive-aggressive memos. Just cedar walls, soft mornings, and wind brushing across the water. The consulting work was steady, strategic, focused. I wasn't scrambling to plug corporate leaks or explain basic systems to people who barely read past the subject line. I was building again, this time with purpose, with control. Every morning felt earned. Every night is deserved. 3 months in, Kendra joined full-time. Then Elias. Then, a few others who had once fought beside me in silence are now ready to build something better without having to justify their value daily. We weren't staff. We were partners. And what we were building wasn't just infrastructure, it was proof. Proof that vision, loyalty, and grit still had a place in this industry. 1 year to the week after I walked out of Redwood, I ran into Reagan at a rooftop networking event downtown. She looked smaller somehow. Her blazer didn't quite fit like it used to, and her once commanding voice now came in hushed tones. She saw me, hesitated, then walked over. No smirk, no agenda. You won, she said with a faint, tired smile. I looked her straight in the eyes. There was no victory lap in Medj's clarity. It was never about winning, I replied. It was about not letting someone else decide my worth. She nodded once, and we parted. No dramatics, no final twist. I walked out onto the balcony, looked across the skyline, lit up in fractured gold, and thought about the systems we built. The invisible ones. The ones they think are replaceable until they fall apart without us. Legacy isn't always a name on a plaque. Sometimes, it's the silence after you leave and the shape you left behind. Looking back, I used to believe loyalty meant staying quiet, working harder, and trusting that effort alone would be recognized. But I've learned that value isn't just what you give, it's what you protect. They tried to replace me because they thought everything I built could be duplicated, stored, or archived. They didn't understand that the real blueprint lived in the choices, timing, and silent decisions no one sees on a dashboard. And maybe you're watching this thinking you're just one person in a giant system. But let me tell you, systems fall without the right people holding the invisible threads. So stand your ground. Document your work. Know where your lines are drawn. And most importantly, don't let anyone tell you that your worth is just a number on a spreadsheet. I didn't burn bridges, I built exits. Quiet ones. Strategic ones. And in doing so, I didn't just save myself. I reclaimed everything they thought they could take. That's not revenge. That's clarity. And clarity? That's power.